Hello and welcome back to the Dark Artist series. Today our special guest is a founding member and creative force behind the band, widely considered to be the precursor and main influence in the Gothic Metal movement. Today our guest is Greg from Paradise Lost. Greg, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Absolute pleasure to have you on. Very excited to see your sold out show later on this evening. It's going to be our first time catching you guys live, so I'm very excited to check that out.
It's our first club show since last year. It's all been festivals this year.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Feels kind of weird to be back in a club, but I'm sure it'll be great.
So, Greg, if you don't mind, I want to run through some choice moments in your discography and just kind of get your thoughts on where your head was at the time or kind of the influences you had behind it. So if we take it back to the very beginning, when Paradise Lost first formed, what was your mission kind of as a band when you began, and who were your biggest influences on your sound at the beginning?
Well, we were tape trading at the time, which opens you to a lot of different styles at once, and there was no real. It was an emerging underground scene at the time, but there wasn't much of a scene. It was like a handful of people in each country. You tended to go with whatever was people were sending you. So they'd send you mixtapes, and you get things like hardcore from Japan, but weird hardcore, and then you'd get death metal from Florida, and then you'd get some crazy stuff from Sweden, and then you kind of mix it all together, and it was all mixed up. But at the same time, we were all into like the 4AD stuff as well, you know, like I was a huge Dead Can Dance fan and Sisters fan from an early age. So that mixed in with all this really extreme underground music. We used to play in like these little punk clubs with the first incarnation of Napalm Death and stuff like that, and Bolt Thrower and all these bands, and it was all just kind of, it was the same clubs that the night after it would be a goth night. But all these places just used to mingle it all together, so you never really, you know, everyone stood in their own corners, but it was the same place, you know.
We've heard that once or twice now about kind of the scene in the late 80s and early 90s, that it wasn't so separated back then as it kind of is now. Everyone who was alternative, regardless of whether they were into hardcore or punk or goth or new wave, everyone kind of banded together to have just an alternative spot.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of, it would be called hate speech today, but banter between the various subcultures. I mean, I remember we used to do it with, I was a punk when I first started out, so, well, I first went into pubs and stuff, so I had a big bleached Mohican and stuff like that, and the tartan on and stuff. We used to be at odds with the metalers, but it was never serious.
Yeah.
And there'd be the goths in another corner, and I kind of flitted between all the lot. I think it was because our common foe was the oi polloi.
Yeah.
As it were, you know, whatever you want to call them these days, but it's just the general public. And I suppose you see yourself as outsiders and you band together in that respect, you know. I'm talking mid-80s here. That's when it was, all this stuff was bubbling away and becoming exciting, you know. So on every corner there was a pub or a club. Every night you could go into a different one and it'd be full of people, and that just slowly over the years has been eroded away. And I remember where I'm from, it became from one a night to once a week spot, and then there was a once a month spot, and now you can't really find anywhere, and I'm not far from Whitby.
Yeah, that's surprising. Here it's like once a month as well.
I think it's with the mainstream distancing itself from all this stuff. Eventually, I'm not sure when that happened, sometime in the 90s. But the mainstream were behind it all, and then all of a sudden just moved on to something else.
I do think there's definitely a bit of a resurgence in that sense. There has been a bit of a revival of Gothic and post-punk music in, I don't want to say mainstream, we haven't seen it have as big a chart-topping pop moment as it was having in the 80s and the 90s, but definitely in more kind of widely consumed general media, we do see that influence kind of come back in.
Over the years we've seen it come and go and fade,
yes,
ebb and flow, or, you know, sometimes something catches someone's imagination, like I know the synthwave thing brought a lot of people back because of like Carpenter Brut, Perturbator and stuff like that. So then it became kind of okay to like stuff like that within metal.
Yes.
All of a sudden. So then that kind of spins it out a bit more into the further population, if you know what I mean.
So stepping back into your discography, after your debut, you released Gothic and then followed that up with Shades of God. In those albums, you played around with adding female vocals into it, and I don't want to say theatrical, but almost kind of like symphonic-y kind of elements in parts of it. And you were one of the first bands within the metal scene to really integrate integrate those things into your music. Was the thought process that you definitely wanted to go this way, or was it something that you had kind of just had come to you naturally?
It was something that we wanted to do from the start, kind of, but we're probably too inexperienced to do it. So then, as we got a few gigs under our belt and gelled more, then we felt more comfortable with incorporating those 4AD type influences. Like the cover is kind of obscure and it's meant to be like that, like a Nephilim album or something. And there's lots of Sisters nods on the album, there's Dead Can Dance nods on the album. And that was unheard of for the time for a band that came from where we came from. And it didn't pay off initially. People think it was like this overnight thing where everyone went, aha. And it just wasn't. I had to go with the label boss to Holland and beg for its release. Wow. Because they said, this isn't death metal and it's not gothic, what is it? So that's when the term Gothic Metal came about, basically. It took 6 months from its release to people sort of picking up on it and then the buzz going around and, as we played shows, they got fuller and fuller. And it was a slow thing, but I guess that's what happens when you try to...
innovate.
You don't know you're trying to do that, or maybe you aren't. You're just being honest. You're just bringing in everything that you like and wearing it on your sleeve, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't,
But I do think you were definitely ahead of your time with those albums. And then you followed up with Draconian Times. And then, of course, Icon was an album that I think you really solidified the blueprint, I guess, for what Gothic metal would become. Was it a conscious decision to keep pushing in that direction, to bring more of those, as you say, 480 influences into the music?
We just learned that we were understanding how it all worked, what fit with what. And I have to pull you up, Icon came before Draconian Times.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. But on Shades of God, we had one song called As I Die, which wasn't originally on the first pressing. Mm-hmm. But then everyone was raving about this track that we released somewhere else called As I Die. So it went on the pressings after that. And it was As I Die that was the link to it. We were like, that's how it fits together. And that led to the Icon album and Draconian Times album. We kind of figured out, because you're always scrabbling around for things and you just think, wow, that really works. So we had our sound, I guess.
And that sound went on to basically create an entire subgenre of metal music that influenced so many bands. What was it like at the time, seeing all these bands crop up afterwards who followed in your footsteps and listed you as influences? Did you realize kind of at the time how big of a thing this was going to become? Or
when we did Icon, the first tour that we did after we recorded it was Sepultura had just released their Chaos AD album. Mm-hmm. And we both toured together throughout Europe. And it was a huge tour. And that was the first time, TV companies and magazines came knocking. That was the first time. Mm. So we knew something was different, but that was it. We didn't change the way we did anything. And it became a lot more busy. So from the recording of Icon to the touring ending of Draconian Times, we were away for 3 years without a break.
Wow,
much.
Yeah.
It's tough going, but yeah, you notice something picking up. And that's when you notice bands coming up and saying, we've started a band because of this album or that album. And that's the first time you become aware of it.
Yeah.
And it's ultra flattering, but usually you find that these bands, if they go on to do more than 1 or 2 records, then they find their own sound. Mm-hmm. You've just been one of their influences. It's weird with the indirect influence, though, because I always remember people like Lacuna Coil and Within Temptation saying, we started a band because of you, meaning us. And then someone like Evanescence was influenced by Lacuna Coil.
Yes, yeah.
And Evanescence probably never heard of us. But
you're like
it's weird, these...
the degrees of separation, like trace it all back to kind of you. That must be very bizarre to feel.
It is, and what's more bizarre is the term Gothic metal, what that went on to become. It became bastardized so much that we didn't recognise... I mean, it's just a term, so it doesn't really matter, but... I mean, Nightwish are called Gothic metal, but I don't think they'd call themselves Gothic. I don't know, but... you know what I mean? It's like it became a much broader term, should I say.
Yeah, of course. Over time, it just sort of sucked bands under that umbrella who maybe wouldn't have been as close to the original movement. I think that kind of happens with all musical subgenres over time.
I was just gonna say that I really like respect what you were doing because you did what you wanted to do, not because you thought like you were doing something. You just stuck to what you wanted to do, even though you weren't sure if it was going to work, and you know you had to really fight for that.
I think you've got to do that, or there's no joy in it. And what's the point in doing it if there's no joy in it? You know, if you're doing something because you want to be famous or you want to sell records, what a pointless exercise. You know, it's a joyless procedure unless you're doing it for the pure love of it, you know.
Which leads me perfectly into my next point. You've basically mapped out the blueprint for Gothic metal at this point. You've several big albums under your belt where you've pioneered this sound. Most bands would be complacent to just continue on down that path and release another album in that vein with, you know, slightly more experience under their belt. Paradise Lost took a complete left turn and released Host, which was such a massive departure from the sound you'd been building at that point. Obviously, you carried over a lot of the elements that you had been introducing to your music at that time, but very jarring, I imagine, to fans at the time. And I personally love that album. I think the experimental sounds that you were putting in, especially at the time, because nowadays I feel like we take it for granted that all kind of modern metal bands have modern digital production and they have these programmed drums and synth sounds, but at the time that was not a done thing, and you guys really pushed the bar experimentation-wise with that album. Was it a deliberate choice to kind of step away from the sound, or was it just that you wanted to try something completely different, or what was the thought process behind Host?
There was a certain amount of self-destruction in it. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely just doing what the hell we wanted. I mean, it was the most fun record we've ever recorded, even to now, because we were given an unlimited budget by EMI, and we completely pissed it away on purpose. You know, it was like, you're only going to get this kind of treatment once. I mean, the turning point for me was we were on the front of Kerrang, and it called us, "Is this the next Metallica?" which was the furthest thing I wanted to be. I mean, nothing against Metallica, and of course, success-wise, amazing, but they also called us hair metal, which straight away just went off, cut our hair off and went synth. You know, what else is there to do, you know? Like that was the knee-jerk reaction to that, but it was fun. And the money that EMI gave was obscene, so we, instead of going into a studio, we hired the actress Jane Seymour's mansion on the southeast coast and built a studio inside it and just lived there for like 3 months.
You put that budget to use.
Hired a chef. all kinds of shit, and just you could see the money just running out of the bank, and it's like did very little, and eventually Host came out, you know, but so much fun and experimenting, because we went in there, we had ideas for songs, but we didn't know what was going to come out at the end, and it had more pre-orders than any other album we'd had, but it also had the most returns.
Well, like I said, I definitely think you've always been a band that was ahead of the times, but I think Host was quite ahead of its time for the metal scene. I feel like maybe there was still that kind of disparity of people being like, oh, well, it's not heavy enough, or, you know, oh, it's got synths in it, that's we're not into this, or whatever. It
was a complete juxtaposition to what was going on at the time. I don't think anybody wanted it at all. Wrong place, wrong time, I guess, you know. And what's weird is, about 5-6 years ago, I was in Norway at a festival, Total Black Metal Fest, and a couple of old school guys came up to me and said, "Oh, we just thought we'd tell you we really love your Host album." We did then, but we weren't allowed to say. And it was like, oh, okay, right.
It was that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can imagine that coming up a lot. People listening to it in secret in their bedrooms. But
I like the idea of being a dirty little secret, you know. Something quite nice about that, you know.
So skipping ahead slightly, your album Symbol of Life definitely to me sounds like you brought kind of back in the death, doom, Gothic metal influences with the heaviness and the lyricism, but you also did still have that electronic sound definitely prevalent on the album. Was it then a conscious decision to kind of meld back in almost like your first few albums versus the Hosts and stuff?
No, it was the opposite. It was the opposite of Host, exactly almost, because we'd left EMI owing $1 million. So, you know, they just wrote it off. I think we were Robbie Williams' tax bill that year, obviously. And we signed to BMG. It's just another 3 letters, really. But we were broken. It was the Hangover record. So if Host was the height of the party, the party had ended and you'd woken up and like gone, what the hell, all bleary-eyed. And that was that record. And we were all like coming out of drink and drug problems. And we were kind of rudderless. You know, we had all these ideas, but we didn't know where we were going. And it was the producer, Rhys Fulber, he's an old like industrial electronics guy, frontline assembly.
Oh, nice, yeah.
And he's done lots of solo stuff that's amazing. He's had top 10 hits in various guises. But we met him in the mid-90s, and he was an old fan of the band, and we needed someone to pull this together. And so he came in, and he was the one who, we were crying on his shoulder, he was holding us up, he was saying, do this, do that. And so he was the one that tied all the ideas together for it. I don't think we'd still be a band if it wasn't for him, actually, because he really did. I don't know if he even knows how instrumental he was, but he really was instrumental in keeping the band together and keeping us level-headed and making us productive again, rather than just crying and going, oh, woe is us, you know.
Yeah, sometimes you need that.
So on that record as well was also the cover of Bronski Beat, Small Town Boy.
Yeah.
I find that such an interesting choice for you as a band. I'd love to know what was the story behind choosing to cover that song. And I think your style for that album 100% suited it. It's an incredible cover, but what was the process behind deciding to do that?
All the covers we've ever done, I mean, starting at the beginning, it was a Sisters cover or something. We've done some very eclectic covers. We did Everything But the Girl as well. They're all from a jukebox that used to be in a pub we used to go to.
No way.
And they're all kind of in order.
That's incredible.
You know, it was like a compilation CD that was on this
Yeah.
jukebox, and they were all kind of in order. Like what should we do next? Well, what was next on that CD?
No way.
So yeah, and you know, we toyed with the Small Town Boy for a while. We can't do Small Town Boy. It's a gay anthem. But we thought, you know, give it a go, and we thought we altered it enough to make it worthwhile. You know, because that's the only point in doing covers. You know, I don't want to do a carbon copy of it. You know, you don't want to do Overkill by Motorhead and just do it the same. You know, it's like, so yeah, I think we made it different enough, so it was worth doing. Yeah.
Skipping ahead to your latest release, Obsidian. What was your goal with that album? Because it definitely does feel to me like a mix of kind of everything you had done. Because you've, as a band, always changed direction every once in a while, adding new elements, heading in different directions, and then kind of weaving back in and out of other kind of subgenres and stuff. That record to me particularly feels like it's got something from everything that preceded it.
The mixtape type album, well, it's an ideal of mine. If I could do the perfect mixtape album, fantastic. But those type of albums don't usually gel too well, and you end up with a disjointed album that sounds like 10 different bands and none of them doing it particularly well. So it's a hard one to do. So Obsidian was kind of a bit like that, but not going too far, I suppose. It was remaining within our catalogue, should we say. It wasn't pushing the envelope massively, but yeah, I think from track to track, that was kind of the thinking behind it, to make it not get bored too quickly, you know.
I definitely think it flows well. It doesn't feel like jarring in a sense. I do think it's almost a perfect culmination of everything that came before it. And speaking of everything that came before it, I know that you guys have been working on Icon 30 that's coming out December this year, and it's not a remaster, it's a complete re-recording, I believe, of the album. What was that like, kind of going back to something so far removed from what you're doing now? You've probably got 10 albums under your belt between, well, and that's just with Paradise Lost excluding Strigoi or Valenfire or even the new Host. What was it like kind of revisiting that and going back in and re-recording all those songs? And were you kind of making changes on the fly, or are you sticking true to the original record?
It's such a stalwart record of ours, you know, benchmark record, that there was never any discussion that we would change it. So it's not changed. It's the main reason we decided to re-record it is because we don't own the rights to it. Which is bizarre. The 30th anniversary was coming up. We were asked to do some shows, and we thought, well, maybe remaster the album, see if we can make it sound better. And they're like, no. So it's like, okay, we'll re-record it then. So that's how that came about, and it was kind of interesting because there's a couple of tracks on it that we now and again put in the set list over the years and keep playing, but the huge majority of it I'd completely forgotten. From that point of view, it was very interesting. It's like, I wouldn't really write a song like that anymore, but that's a good idea, you know. I'll have that, you know. Like so yeah, it was interesting, you know, to do and to hear where your head was at.
Almost feels kind of like a time capsule, I'm sure. It brings you back to the thought process and the emotions and everything you were feeling at the time when you were writing the record.
Yeah, and it makes you think about the recording that you did back then, because we were in a place called Jacobs in Surrey, southern England, and it was kind of well-known alternative studio at the time, and it had an A studio and a B studio, and we were in the A studio doing Icon. The Charlatans were in B studio, but it shared a common area where you just sat and watched films on an evening and stuff, so we'd sometimes be with them. Then they left, then Morton Harkett from Aha came in, bizarrely, doing a solo album, so then he was in. And when we were leaving, there was a load of black trucks pulling up, and it was The Cure coming in.
No way.
So it was like a revolving door of... Yeah, and it was a real interesting time to be around that kind of stuff.
So that is the end of this episode of Dark Artists. Thank you at home for watching. We very much hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you, Greg, for spending time with us here today. We very, very much appreciate it. Be sure to check out Icon 30 when it releases in December. And stream Obsidian anywhere now where you get music. And as always, until next time, see you in your nightmares.